and hear what you're telling us, that we would be able to apply this to our lives, Father, as we go through our daily activities. We ask that you be with those that have been mentioned this morning, both that are sick and have lost loved ones, and just the various issues that have been brought before us, Father. I just ask that your hand be upon those, because we know you are the great healer, the great physician, the great counselor, and that your plan is your plan, Father, and that we have to understand what that plan is, Father, and we just ask for that understanding. We ask now, as we prepare for this lesson, that you guide and direct us, and as we leave this place this morning, that you walk with us and guide us and direct us, and as we go throughout our daily activities, Father, that your hand is upon us, and that others will see you in us, and that we will reach out to those that are in need of your understanding and of you, Father. And now, as we prepare for this message, I ask that you forgive us for our many, many failures and shortcomings, and ask all this in your Son's precious, precious name. Amen.
All right, we remain in John 18 this morning. We kind of went through the first half of John 18 last week. We're in the second half of John 18 this week. As you're turning there, just a kind of a bit of a preamble. Does anybody remember the name a few years ago, Dan Brown? I'm sorry? Novelist, yeah. What was Dan Brown known for? Da Vinci Code, yeah. Kind of in literary circles, the kind of the global phenomenon of the Dan Brown, the Da Vinci Code. Remember what the byline of that film was? The book, what the subtitle was? You remember? Seek the Truth. Seek the Truth. Yeah, it's an extraordinary thing. Dan assembled his narrative in a novel, in a fictitious story, but proposed that he was basing everything that he built this novel story on in truth. And so what he was doing was attempting to take what he thought was truth and weave it into a storyline to make it digestible for the masses. It was just extraordinary. It was by my estimation, in many ways grotesque. And when Gail and I were serving in a different congregation several years ago, when that seemed to have swept almost everybody, I was appalled to the degree that I felt, well, I really need to offer an opinion, a second thought. And so I led a study on basically debunking the Dan Brown lie. And from that, I was asked if I was going to do that I needed to advertise this. So I just created this little poster, and on that poster it said, "Seek the truth, Dan Brown. I am the way, the truth, and the life, Jesus Christ. And lastly, what is truth? Pilate." And that was my way of approaching what Dan Brown had to offer. Nobody of sound mind sets out a course of life intentionally seeking self-deception. Nobody. That's not, self-deception. Now, do people set out on a path of life to deceive other people? Oh yeah, that's real common. That's power. If I had, if Dan Brown's quote phenomenon taught us anything, it taught us that Gnosticism is alive and well in the world. Secret access to secret truth that other people don't have, that you're privileged to have. Or in the case of the Gnostics of old, that, for a certain price I can sell you this special truth. That was, if Dan Brown taught us anything, he taught us that Gnosticism is alive and well. People are willing to sacrifice a great deal for what they think someone else is offering as a secret truth that will enlighten you, especially when it comes to something that is supernatural or spiritual. There was a philosopher in the late 1700s, early 1800s by the name of John Locke. And John thought and proposed and was extremely influential to his peers and those who followed him that nothing was knowable, that and to invert that coin, all things are relative. Nothing is knowable. Everything that you think you know is just an assimilation into the collective position. And the collective position that the United States of America is a nation, well, then I can say, I know that America is a nation. But all you've really done is agreed that the collective say that the United States of America is a nation. And John would propagate this idea, much to the chagrin of his contemporaries, but he was extremely influential, that nothing is knowable. All things are relative. Now, Albert Einstein, just a few years later, developed the theory of relativity, of general relativity, and then there was specific relativity and some spin-offs on it. But late in his life, one of his greatest concerns about his theory is that people had taken his concept, his theory in physics, and made it a social construct. And he actually spoke against that, saying, I never intended my theory to govern social construct, a perception about the nature of truth, epistemology. It was only about physics. That's what I was doing. My theory of general relativity was about physics, not an epistemological statement about the nature of being, of personage. And yet, in spite of that, many, many people immediately took off with this idea that all things are relative. There's a senator in Louisiana. Kennedy is his last name. Do you know his? John? No, is it John? Yeah. The Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana? Yeah. One of the most brilliantly outspoken senators, one of the brightest minds in Washington. And he has been quoted many times as saying that you're entitled to your opinion. What you're not entitled to is your alternative facts. Yeah, love John. Yeah, if you haven't listened to John, when he speaks, you want to hear what he has to say. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, he's a charming guy too. But most of the guys in the South are. But just a brilliant. If you're familiar with that term, you kind of know where this comes from. Alternative facts. How often do you hear from the podiums of our federal government, and for that matter, our state governments, this idea of alternative facts? Especially when it comes up in debate. It happens all the time. All you're saying is that there's nothing knowable, that there are no absolutes, and that your facts are just as good as your facts, or just as good as my facts. And all we're really talking about is opinion, not facts, because facts are absolute. But in a world of relativism, there are no absolutes. In fact, the guy who says nothing is knowable is probably the most unintelligent person on the planet, because you can't know for certain what I just told you, that nothing is knowable. So effectively, I've said nothing. Do you follow that? So barely. Yeah, if I tell you nothing is knowable, then the very thing that I've just said, I'm expecting you to accept as truth, but I've just told you that truth doesn't exist. So what credibility are you going to give me? See, I've said effectively nothing. So that's the world that we live in today, where all things are relative. We get to offer ourselves self-exoneration and sweep anything we want to under the rug and highlight what's important to us and devalue that which is not. And each man is an island unto himself. And quite frankly, the whole world is an ocean that has been covered with tiny islands of people. That's what we live in today. It's not new news. It's old news brought back forward news. When Pilate is in a conversation with Jesus, and they're talking about Jesus' kingship, then the kingship of Christ is what is on the table in three trials. A trial of the religious leadership, a trial of the masses, and a trial of the civil leadership. And we're at the point of the third of those three trials, the trial of the civil leadership, when we get to John 18:28. But I want you to know how we get to the trial of civil leadership. And what's on the table? What's on the table is definitely Jesus, the lordship and the kingship, the divinity of Jesus. But the tool by which these three trials process an answer to that question is truth. Is what is being communicated by Jesus or about Jesus true? Now, I set out this week to really kind of hit all three trials, and I realized really quickly that I had bitten off way, way too much. There's no way that in one morning we can get through all three trials. We're going to touch on the spiritual trial. We're going to touch on the trial of the masses, or the trial of the court of public opinion, and then but we're going to focus on. We're going to use kind of the third trial, the trial of the civil authority, as our way to navigate these trials this morning. So let's read this passage really quick, but slow enough. Greg has asked me to read slower when I read Scripture, so I'm really making a concerted effort to do that. And I mean, maybe 6-7 weeks ago was my first time really seriously trying to do that, and somebody asked me if something was wrong. And I said, no, I'm just trying to. You did a great job. Yeah, I'm just, okay, good. So I'm trying to slow down. Starting at verse 18, then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. Now, before we start there, leading Jesus from Caiaphas' house to the palace of the Roman governor, that's the transition. We've been at Caiaphas' house, and before that we were at Annas' house. And then while between the two, there's the riling of the court of public opinion. The riling of the court of public opinion hits its crescendo in the events of Pilate's trial, but which is far more a hearing than a trial, but it was probably the fairest of the attempts at getting to truth of any of the three of them. But that's how we get to Pilate's house. Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves, judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. Did you catch that really quick? Try him by your own law. We don't have a right to execute anybody. Who's talking about execution? I'm just saying try the guy. Find out if what he's saying is true. You already leapt to the point of saying execution. Just don't. There's so much of that stuff in here. I just had to jump on that one really quick. Sorry. "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace and summoned Jesus and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did the others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. And what have you done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You're right in saying that I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born. For this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. And everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis of charge against him. But this is your custom for me to release to you a prisoner in the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." They were the ones that inspired the masses that were there to call out crucify. And then finally, Pilate is that almost Shakespearean event of bring me a basin, I wash my hands of this whole situation. So let's go back now to the beginning of Pilate's investigation. Again, it's probably the fairest shake that he got. Now, to do that, we want to step backwards for a moment. I told you we were going to step backwards for a moment into the trial of the religious leadership. Now, the trial of the religious leadership started immediately following the arrest, and they took him to Annas' house. Now, Annas is the father-in-law to Caiaphas. There was a bit of a discussion there, but then he was moved on to Caiaphas' house. Okay, so that's where the real interrogation began. Now, I don't know for sure why we stopped there first and then went to Caiaphas, but I do know that the Sanhedrin had to be a part of this exchange. And we talked last week that we're already in kind of hot water already. We've done an arrest after dark, which is illegal for us to do, and now we're about to conduct a trial, which is after dark, which is illegal for us to do. I'm proposing that Malchus was a recorder that recorded the events of the arrest, such that there could be a self-verifying or a self-identifying value to the claim that Malchus will say when he stands in this court. But it's the Sanhedrin that's got to show up. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but the Sanhedrin is a very large format court. It is the spiritual court. It is a court of 70 learned men. 70 men plus one, a total of 71. So it's 70 plus one. That comes from when Moses was struggling, kind of handling all the claims of all the people of Israel. The Lord says, select 70, and then you stand with them, and between all of you all be able to manage all the claims of the people of Israel. And this is back when they were wandering in the desert. So the Sanhedrin was based upon that. That's why there's 70. Technically, that's called the Great Sanhedrin when you invent the Lesser Court. The Lesser Court is called this, the Lesser Sanhedrin. That makes the original Sanhedrin of 71 the Greater Sanhedrin. The Lesser Sanhedrin only has to be composed of 23. And the 23 had the authority to judge on trials that included capital punishment. So you didn't have to have all 71 in order to do this. I'm going to suggest to you that it was highly likely that assembling the Sanhedrin in the middle of the night for an illegal trial was probably not what happened. A lesser Sanhedrin was composed of 23. So let's just assume for a minute that's what we have. This was valuable to me. I hope it's valuable to you. There's a qualification for the guys that have to sit. The 23 guys that showed up at Caiaphas' house to hear the testimony had to be men of wisdom, humility, had an awe of heaven, a loathing for money, especially their own wealth, a love of truth, a love of all people, and be of good reputation. Those are the 7 qualifications that you had. And on top of that, you had to begin as a rabbi. So you had to be well-trained. You had to be ascend to the class of a rabbi, and then be judged by your peers to exemplify these 7 virtues in order to be considered a member of the Sanhedrin. Out of that, 23 now show up at Caiaphas' house. Good men. Men who love wisdom, love truth, abhor the idea of deception, bribe, money. They were humble men, men of wisdom, men who loved people. That's the guys that we're talking about who have assembled now at Caiaphas' house. The other thing that we want to know really quick about the trial of the Sanhedrin is that if you're the accused, you don't get any witnesses. All of the gravity is on the side of the accuser. The accuser only has to have 2 corroborating witnesses for the Sanhedrin then to evaluate the truth or lie of the claim against the accused. But the accused doesn't get to present any witnesses. The accused only gets to present his own voice. What is the Isaiah prophecy about the Messiah when it comes to defending himself? I'm sorry? He'll be silent. That he'll stand silent before his accusers as a sheep stands silent before a shearer. That was the prophecy. We're not going to get too far into this, but Jesus does have some conversation with these people. In 2 of the 3 trials, the court of public opinion he doesn't really address, but 2 of the 3 he does have some conversation, because we trip on into Herod for a minute before we come back to Pilate's house. So there's kind of a third one, but I put both of those in the same category as the civil trial. So he does have some conversation, but not in defense. It's always in clarification. So when you hear Jesus speak in these trials, he hasn't violated the prophecy. He's not speaking in his defense. He's speaking in terms of clarification. So we get Jesus in there. There's just really briefly one part that I want to highlight from that trial before we get back into Pilate. The high priest said, I'm in Matthew 26. I'm going to begin in the second part of verse 63. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God, tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, remember, what we're after is a determination about whether or not Jesus is the Son of God, or at least claims to be the Son of God. Don't forget that truth is what's really on the table here. Is what you tell me true? But they're asking him for his own confession about this. Now, how many guys do you think of the 23 of the Sanhedrin, plus all the other officials there, plus Caiaphas, which one of these guys was still unsure about whether or not Jesus was guilty? None of them. They've been working for months to try to find some quote, and this is not my word, this is scriptural word, sly way to arrest and kill him. Yeah, and the word sly is directly from Scripture. They've been working for months on a way to kill him. They already made up their mind. To call this a trial is kind of silly. It's not even a valid hearing. And remember, it violates all of our laws, and it's done by guys that are supposed to be upstanding and right, who are clearly not in this exchange between Jesus and his accusers here. So they said, tell us plainly, are you the Son of God? And Jesus says, yes, it is as you say. And I know we've hit this before, but I just want to read it again. I want to illuminate it. But I say to all of you, in the future, you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. Now that's Jesus' response to, are you the Son of God? Now, if you've missed it, what he said was, I am the Son of God, I am your judge, and I'm coming back. If they heard what he said, they should have shuddered at the thought that they have already made up their mind to kill the Son of God, who will be my judge for doing that very thing. But they didn't. They were so consumed by this idea of Jesus being a disruptor, a deceiver, a man who holds no truth, who undermines their authority and their power. And they've justified this by saying that as a disruptor, he makes turmoil. And our job as the religious leadership is to bind our nation together, to get us through this occupation of Rome. And by whatever means it is necessary, it is by our power that we hold our nation together to get us through to the other side of Rome's tyranny over us. And we don't have a means of doing that, but we do have to bind us together. So anything that we can do to hold this nation together, we're willing to do, even if it means killing a guy. And Caiaphas actually testified to that very conviction when he, quote, prophesied earlier that year that it is good for one man to die for the nation than the whole nation to die. Do you remember that? Do you remember the prophecy that he made himself? Now, you could take that one of two ways, or you could take it both ways. You could take it is that it is good for one man to die, and if he's dead, all the dissent settles down, we hold together as a nation, and we survive as a nation. And we don't perish as a nation. Or you can say, if he really is the Messiah, it is good for one man to die such that all of us are saved. I'm going to suggest to you that since that's qualified as a prophecy, he didn't understand what he was saying. That he was giving to Israel a future to be fulfilled in the person of Christ without really even having any idea what he was saying. So let's go on. So now in the religious trial, this one just totally gets me. Then the high priest tore his robes and said, "He has spoken blasphemy. Why do we need any more witnesses? Look, now you have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" That's the dumbest question on the planet. What do you think? Remember who's assembled here. This is the 23 of your elite judges who understand the Word of God, the law of God, who are charged with humility and love of all people, unbribable decision makers, and they're asked for your opinion on the Messiahship? Your opinion? If I was like in a corner there, I'd say, guys, just before you answer that, hold on. What does the prophets say? If what's on the table here is this the Son of God or not? We're loaded with prophecy. We've got over 100 prophecies that determine of all of human existence, there'd be one Messiah, and that one Messiah would have to fulfill the prophecies. And we know this. But we don't care about the prophecy at this point. All I want is your opinion. What do you think? It was predestined. You know, you ever gotten the wrong answer to a question because you're asking the wrong question? Yeah. Or somebody asking you for information, and they're asking you a question that has nothing to do with the answer that they're really looking for. And so when you give them the answer to their question, they're still really frustrated. You've been in that situation. I've been in that situation enough times to.
Yeah, I don't go with my first instinct sometimes, so I get the question wrong.
Yeah, right. So, I mean, that happens with Jesus a lot of times. Jesus a lot of times got to clarify the question for you before he can answer the question that you're really after. I mean, anytime Jesus asks you a question, know that that's what he's doing. He's clarifying the question that you really don't even realize that you're asking in order to get to the question that you really want the answer to, and then he gives you the answer. So, what is your opinion? What do you think? That's the best they're going to work with, an opinion. And they set the standard for the court of public opinion. All of the masses of people who really don't know, who just kind of running along with the world, the way the world goes, and, oh yeah, I heard about this guy named Jesus, he's in town, I don't know, maybe he is, maybe he's not, I don't know, but all of our leaders have concluded that he's a deceiver, a blasphemer. And so that's the position that they're in. So they struggle with all this. They end up saying, nope, this is finally we've got a claim. Blasphemy, that can be our charge. We had a couple of witnesses in, because that's what you're supposed to do in a Sanhedrinic trial, is to have two witnesses. Two agreed witnesses gives you the credibility you need to evaluate, that you evaluate based upon the law, and then you judge. Okay, we already had two witnesses in, but the guys couldn't agree. We couldn't get two witnesses out of all of the people that we brought in here that could agree, so we really can't even lean upon that. So what are we left with? Our opinions. So let's get back to John. John, we're through the Sanhedrinic trial at Caiaphas' house. We're through Annas' house. We've now been delivered, and it's morning time, which means at sunset they started the Passover meal, because that's when the Passover meal was started, in the upper room. They left the Passover meal that evening, went to the Garden of Gethsemane. The Garden of Gethsemane, there was the arrest, then the trip to Annas' house, Caiaphas' house. So from sunset the previous day until morning, cockcrow, which is sunrise. It's just a term for a sunrise. The following day is the window of time that we've covered so far, and we get to Pilate's house. Now, was Pilate expecting this? No. There was no appointment. There was no trial date set for this. There was no appointment made. They just show up with Jesus in tow and knock on the door and say, "We want to see Pilate." But don't miss the irony in this too. This is really something. Yeah. By now it was early morning. To avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat Passover. Passover was first on their mind. In order to eat Passover, we need to be ceremonially clean. If we determine that we are ceremonially clean, if we step into Pilate's house, we're going to be ceremonially unclean. So then we won't be able to eat Passover. So we don't go in his house because we want to eat Passover. Passover, Passover, Passover. Oh yeah, Passover was that annual celebration about God redeeming his people that for centuries had been honored every year to point to the claim that one day our Redeemer will come, the Messiah would come. So in order to have Passover to celebrate one day our Messiah will come, we're not going to go in Caiaphas' house when we deliver the Messiah to Caiaphas to kill him. You get the irony in that? Yeah. There are so many ways that you can see how religion has polluted the minds of men. Totally polluted the minds of men. That's why when we talk about the relationship with Christ versus the religion. It's not semantics. This is not linguistic gymnastics. We're talking about a very real difference between religion and relationship. Jews did not want to enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" Now you have to go to Luke 23 to hear the charges that they bring against Jesus. But they do voice their charges against Jesus. That basically they're spiritual charges. And, I'm sorry, no. We should look at that. Because they do make some spiritual charges. But Luke 23, they actually make some sense out of that. There it is. My goodness, I thought there it is. It's 23 verse 2. We have found this man subverting our nation. Which Pilate should care less about. I don't care if he's subverting your nation. This is my nation. So if he's undermining your authority in your nation, I got some news for you. You're not in authority over your nation. Okay, I am. So that one doesn't land. But then he says, he opposes the payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be the Christ the King. Well, only one of those has any real value, that he opposes paying taxes to Caesar. And so because the other two really don't mean anything to Pilate. I don't care. That's all on your side of the ledger, and you're going to have to deal with that. But when it comes to opposing paying taxes to Caesar, but I got to tell you guys, all this yak about opposing paying taxes to Caesar, it ain't happening. I'm collecting. The tributes that come out of this city and out of this territory are in full measure, and they're going off to Rome. So your claim about him not paying taxes, it's not true. So they do make their charges. So when Pilate says, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" John records, "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "would we not have handed him over to you?" So if you just read John's equation, they dodge the question and say, it's for the very reason he's a criminal that we're handing over you to deal with the criminal here. But they do include the charges, none of which make any difference to Pilate. Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." That's what we've been doing all night long. Okay, we've done that. And we have determined that he's guilty of a penalty, or guilty of a charge that is to be executed, that he is to be executed by. Take him yourself and judge him by your own law. But we have no right to execute anybody. Here's the deal. I wasn't talking about executing. I'm just saying, judge him. Give him a trial by your own law. They have. Okay, fine. But they leap to the point of execution. I haven't even had my first cup of coffee this morning yet, and you're asking me to deal with your claim of guilt and execution, and I'm supposed to do that?
I'm on my third.
You're on your third. Good. But we have no right to execute anyone. Now, here's the truth behind that. Yeah, you do. You do. What was the Jewish charge against Jesus? Blasphemy. Blasphemy against God. Leviticus 24:14 through 16, crystal clear that anyone that's found guilty of blasphemy against God is to be stoned to death. Not only do you have the right, you have the responsibility by law to stone someone guilty of the crime that you claim Jesus is guilty of. It's not that you don't have the right, you have the responsibility to do this, and you're not doing it. Now, this is where John kicks in editorially. I don't know how it is that they come to that conclusion. I do know this much, that they would need Rome's approval to execute someone, so they couldn't just execute by their own law without, they could do lots of judgment of their own law, but they couldn't execute of their own law without Rome's approval. And the reason they need Rome's approval is because dead people don't pay taxes. And so you're not allowed just to start killing your own people all the time because they violated your law if those people are also taxpayers, because their tax revenue is more important to me than your law is to you. And so if you start killing my taxpayers, then I'm going to be coming for you. So that's how Rome sees this. Now, just to clarify where Pilate's at, we do have, if you go forward into 19, Pilate says in verse 5, as soon as the chief priests, 19 verse 6, as soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis of charge against him." So Pilate gives the authority of Rome to go ahead and crucify. So you got my approval. Have at it. If you guys are so adamant about this, have at it. Gosh, we're already running out of time here, so I've got to pick it up a little bit. We have no right to execute anyone. Yes, you do. It's your responsibility. Rome has given their authority, but now this is John's editorialization here that we need to see. This happened so that the words that Jesus had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Stoning to death was not crucifixion. Crucifixion was the kind of death that Jesus said he would have. Now, the Jews wanted Rome to crucify because crucifixion is a humility on display. We want all the people of Israel to know this is not the King of the Jews. He's dead on a cross. He's been judged by our court as guilty. He's been judged by Rome as guilty. And for everybody to see in all of its regalia, death on a cross, humility. Humiliation. That's what happens to people who subvert our law. Pilate went back inside and placed us in his palace and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews? Is this your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did you talk to someone else about me?" So this is the gateway into the real discussion about truth. Is this your own idea, or did you talk to other people about me? What Jesus is saying clearly to Pilate is that, have you done a careful investigation? Do you know who I am? Do you know the prophecies of the Messiah, of the one true living God, and whether or not I have lived a life that fulfilled these prophecies? Have you done the hard work of answering the question, what is truth? What is truth isn't even the question on the table yet. Jesus knows where we're going. Remember, Jesus knows everything that is about to happen to him. I asked you to hang on to that last week for at least 2 more weeks. It comes back to the table now. Jesus already knows what's going on. So, did you do the hard work of determining truth? Have you done the research, or have you just been listening to other people and you're along the bandwagon with everybody else? And so Pilate says, "What, am I a Jew?" I mean, the point that he's saying is that I don't know you people. I don't know your kind. I don't know your law. I don't know your God. I mean, I don't know. It's just they come to me to make this pronunciation, and I've got to evaluate whether or not you violated Rome's law, because I really don't care if you violate it there. All I care about is whether you violate my law, because if I'm passing judgment, the highest governing my authority in my life is Rome. And so when Rome speaks, I evaluate truth from lie based upon, or messiahship or not messiahship, execution or acquittal based upon the law of Rome, not on your all's law. And I've given you over to these guys to do it, and they still won't do it. They're still depending upon me to make an answer. So I've got to pass judgment here. It was your people, your chief priests, who handed you over to me. What have you done? Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent the arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place." I don't want to. We got to move quick here. Anybody watch the coronation of King Charles? Charles. That's right. Charles yesterday. Yeah, saw some of that. No, I hadn't intended to. I'm up early on Saturday morning. I'm getting my news brief, my weather brief. I said, "Oh gosh, that's on. That's right now. This is live." And so for a few minutes I watched it. Oh, gosh, the huge regalia associated with the crowning of a new king in England. I don't know if anybody does it any more elaborately, any more gloriously than the English do. And it all happens in, is it Westminster Abbey? Yeah, Westminster Abbey. And that the priest of Westminster Abbey is the one that presides over it. And this has been going on for centuries. And that is that the church crowns the king. By the authority of the church, the new king is sat, binding the leadership, the civil leadership, and the spiritual leadership of a nation together. And I watched it long enough to hear the prayers and hear the pronunciation and the charge to the king. If you listened to this yesterday, you heard the charge to the king, and then the orb with the cross on it and the diadem, and that he is to rule as an emissary of God through the power of Christ as he executes his kingly duties over a nation. This is, Yeah, I'm looking at what I know of Charles here, and I'm having a hard time with this, but I'm still hanging on to it because I want to see how it is but this has been going on for centuries, where the church crowns the king, and the jewels and the robes and the ceremony and all of the things that are associated with it. You want to know how the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, was coronated? He was accused, submitted to a kangaroo court 3 times over. He was, a crown of thorns was thrust upon his head. The mockery of a purple robe was cast upon his back. The scourging in the court of Caiaphas. Almost completely bled out after the scourging, having to carry his own cross only so far before Simon of Cyrene? Yeah, picked up his cross and carried it the rest of the way to Golgotha. He was crucified, hung, and don't miss this, gave up his life. That's how the King of Kings was coronated. You don't know how he was the King of Kings before we believed it. It didn't make any difference whether we believed it or not. But the confirmation in our lives that he's the King of Kings, the coronation of him as king, happened on Golgotha. Couldn't have been more different than how kingdoms of man coronate their kings and how the kingdom of God coronates the king. Give me just a second. We'll wrap up here. My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. But now my kingdom is from another place. It's like almost perfect timing to be able to contrast what happened yesterday morning and what happened a little over 2,000 years ago on a cross. And who is the highest governing authority in your life? I got to tell you, even in England, it's not Charles. It's the one that hung on the cross. When you're looking for a coronation of a king, be careful what you're looking for. Be careful where you're seeking truth. Okay, so I got to go. Then you are a king. Yeah, I'm working on this. You asked me if I listen to other people, if I'm working on it. I'm working on it, okay? I'm talking to you. We're having a conversation. Remember, silent before a sheriff? No, not necessarily, because he is clarifying but not defending himself. You're right in saying I am, can't get past I am, Yahweh, a king. In fact, for this reason, I was born, but don't miss the second qualification. And for this reason, I came into the world. I was born, yes, to be a human being like you, to show you the God of your creation. But I came into this world for that reason. That's the reason I came. He gives you both. He gives you the pragmatic thing you can understand and the spiritual thing you should understand. Everyone on the side of the truth listens to me. If you've asked Jesus, about truth, I am the way, the truth, and the life. That's kind of the second of the three things. Seek the truth. I am the way, the truth, and the life. What is truth? Now we're getting to what is truth. If truth, the truth be told about truth is, what is truth is probably better phrase is who is truth. That would have been the easier question to answer. But the Pilate's concern is what is truth. You see that Pilate already lives in a relativistic world. I'm already balancing these wacky Jews and the tyranny of Rome, and I'm still playing second fiddle to Herod, and I'm caught in the middle of all of this. My wife is yakking at me about a dream that she had, and if I don't deal with some way with what's okay, I'm getting there. Thank you. If I don't deal with some way with how to deal with this, then the whole world's going to come collapsing down around me. So he gives up. What is truth? You're standing in front of him, but you don't see him. So then he tries to go release Barabbas. They want Jesus. He goes back in and has Jesus flogged, hoping that will satiate the crowd. Crowd cries out even more. And then the big, and this is, we'll finish here. Gail's waving her phone at me for the third time. We'll finish here. Pilate does everything he can not to submit to their desire to crucify Jesus. And then he comes out and he says, "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him, crucify him. "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the priests answered. We have so backed into a corner on our commitment to destroy this man Jesus, we're willing to say the most crazy thing that can come out of our mouths. And that is, there's only one king, and that's Caesar. Do you see? Religion destroys minds. Religion destroys minds. If we are not willing to do what Jesus said, is that your own idea, or have you been listening to other people? If we are not willing to come to Jesus to find out who Jesus is, then the world will teach you almost anything. And you'll be swallowed, literally swallowed by religion, thinking that we're living pious lives. We have to close here, and we're late, and if we, no, you're going to be in rain anyhow. Thoughts before we close this morning? We didn't even get to Herod. Herod was a great event in itself, and maybe we get back to Herod sometime. Thoughts before we close this morning?
I just find it interesting in the one verse that it didn't go because we don't have time. Jesus told him, "You have no power over me."
Yeah, if it wasn't given to you. Yeah, the only power you have is what's been given to you. You don't know it, but you're not going to take my life. I'm going to give it. Yeah, I'm laying it down for you. Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. There's so many. I mean, even if we just take on one of the 3 trials, it's really hard to get through in the morning. Other thoughts before we go this morning?
Well, if Pilate says, I'll release one of the 2 prisoners, and he says, the crowd, he says, which one do you want? To me, that the way I interpret that means that Pilate had an open mind, right?
Yeah, to satisfy the crowd.
Yeah.
I mean, I've got a way out of this. I can use your own custom to get out of this by releasing you. We all recognize that Barabbas is an insurrectionist and a murderer. There's no question about that in anybody's minds. And so we can do that if you're willing to walk this one out with me. But they're not. Mr. Pittman, would you close this morning? It's great to see you both back this morning.
Well, kind Father, we thank you for this time. Thank you for loving us, blessing us, your word, and Jesus. Forgive me, Lord, I know I failed, and I thank you for this sharing in, Todd, his time that he brings each Sunday. Lord, thank you for being back. Thank you for hearing our prayers, and we ask for the week, Lord, that we look to you for that strength and guidance that we shared today. So forgive us. Let's just stay as we go forward. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Good class. Thank you, brother. Appreciate your comment.